How did a rainy island become the ruler of 1/4 of the globe? At its peak, the British Empire controlled over 450 million people. This isn't just conquest, it's calculated domination. Let's unravel how Britain conquered lands, rewrote history, and changed the world forever. The British Empire wasn't built overnight. Rooted in trade, piracy, and politics, its expansion shaped continents and cultures. From colonies to rebellions, riches to ruthless control, the empire's story is both triumphant and tragic. This is the shocking story of how Britain took over the world. Britain's imperial ambitions began with piracy. Elizabethan sea dogs like Francis Drake plundered Spanish ships for gold. This state-sponsored piracy was a stepping stone to empire, weakening rivals, enriching England, and igniting a thirst for maritime dominance that would define British global expansion for centuries. The East India Company became Britain's imperial engine. Founded in 1600, it started as a trading body but soon wielded armies, governed territories, and minted coins. With royal backing, it conquered ports in India and Asia, fusing capitalism with conquest in a ruthless imperial enterprise. Colonies in the Americas marked Britain's first overseas possessions. Jamestown, founded in 1607, survived against all odds. Tobacco profits drove expansion, while settlers pushed inland, clashing with Native Americans. These early settlements planted the colonial mindset, that distant lands existed to serve British wealth. Religion fueled colonization. British missionaries spread Christianity alongside imperial rule. In Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, civilizing missions disguised exploitation. The Bible and the British flag often arrived together, reshaping indigenous belief systems and justifying domination under the guise of spiritual enlightenment. Naval superiority gave Britain its imperial advantage. After defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588, the Royal Navy became a global force. British warships secured trade routes, enforced colonial law, and projected power across oceans. The sea was Britain's battlefield, and its empire's lifeline. Scotland's 1707 union with England strengthened the empire. Scottish thinkers, soldiers, and merchants became central to imperial success. From Caribbean plantations to Indian offices, Scots played key roles. The British Empire was never just English, it was built by a union of nations with global ambitions. Mercantilism drove British expansion. Colonies were forced to trade exclusively with Britain, funneling raw materials into its industries. Sugar from the Caribbean, cotton from India, tea from China, all flowed into British ports, enriching the empire and fueling a self-sustaining cycle of colonial dependency. The British didn't invade India overnight. They entered as traders through the East India Company, establishing outposts in coastal cities like Calcutta and Bombay. Over time, they exploited internal divisions among Indian rulers, turning allies against one another to slowly tighten their grip on the subcontinent. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 was a turning point. Led by Robert Clive, British forces defeated the Nawab of Bengal with help from treacherous allies. This victory gave Britain control over Bengal's immense wealth and marked the beginning of true British dominance in India. Company rule morphed into tyranny. Indian peasants were heavily taxed, industries destroyed, and famines exacerbated by British negligence. The textile industry collapsed under competition from Manchester mills. While profits soared in London, poverty deepened across India. Colonialism wasn't just political, it was deeply economic and exploitative. The 1857 Sepoy Rebellion changed everything. Sparked by cultural insensitivity and brutal governance, Indian soldiers rose up against their British officers. Though the uprising failed, it shocked Britain. The Crown dissolved the East India Company and took direct control, ushering in the British Raj, a new, harsher colonial regime. Under the Raj, Britain restructured India to suit imperial needs. Railways were built to extract resources. English replaced Persian as the official language. Traditional Indian institutions were sidelined, replaced by Western models. This wasn't modernization, it was control disguised as progress, rooted in racial superiority and economic greed. Despite oppression, British India also witnessed resistance. Thinkers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, leaders like Gandhi, and revolts like the one in 1857 reflected India's unwillingness to be ruled. Britain sowed the seeds of nationalism, unintentionally preparing its largest colony for a future free from empire. India became the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. Its manpower and resources powered British wars and wealth. But beneath this glittering image lay exploitation, resistance, and deep resentment. The conquest of India was brutal, and its legacy still shapes both nations today. Africa became Britain's next imperial focus in the 19th century. The continent was carved up by European powers in the infamous Berlin Conference of 1884. Britain seized vast territories, from Egypt to South Africa, pursuing resources, prestige, and global dominance at lightning speed. British rule in Africa combined indirect governance with brutal enforcement. Chiefs were co-opted into colonial systems, while dissent was crushed. In Kenya, the Mau Mau uprising met with detention camps and torture. Empire brought railroads and schools, but also land seizures, racism, and forced labor. South Africa's mines became imperial gold. Britain fought two Boer wars to secure this region rich in diamonds and gold. Concentration camps were introduced, indigenous populations marginalized, and apartheid's roots laid. Empire here wasn't just conquest, it was racial engineering with economic motives. In West Africa, Britain exploited coastal regions through palm oil and slave trade remnants. Nigeria became a colonial juggernaut, administered through indirect rule. British officials governed through local rulers, creating artificial boundaries that fueled post-independence conflict. The empire reshaped Africa's geography and political future. Egypt was vital for one reason, the Suez Canal. A shortcut to India, it was Britain's lifeline. In 1882, Britain occupied Egypt under the pretext of restoring order. Control of the canal meant control of global trade, proving again that empire followed strategic wealth. British missionaries flooded Africa, bringing Christianity, Western medicine, and English education. But this civilization often erased cultures, languages, and histories. Colonial schools trained Africans to serve the empire, not challenge it. Beneath the moral mission lay a calculated effort to mold minds to imperial interests. African resistance never stopped. From Zulu warriors to Somali rebels, Britain faced constant pushback. Even as flags were raised and maps redrawn, local uprisings reminded colonizers that empire was never fully secure. Africa bled for Britain, but it never surrendered without a fight. Britain expanded into the Pacific and Australasia, claiming lands like Australia and New Zealand. Aboriginal Australians were dispossessed, Maori land seized. Settlers justified conquest by declaring these lands empty, ignoring indigenous presence. Colonization was framed as discovery, but it meant erasure, displacement, and frontier warfare. Australia became a penal colony. Britain transported thousands of convicts to Botany Bay starting in 1788. What began as punishment turned into settlement. Cities grew on stolen land, indigenous Australians were pushed to the margins, and British culture was imposed across the continent under a thin civilizing guise. New Zealand's colonization followed a similar pattern. The Treaty of Waitangi, signed in 1840, promised Maori sovereignty, but was quickly broken. Land confiscations, wars, and settler expansion followed. The empire rarely kept its promises, especially when profit or settlement was at stake. The Caribbean played a different role, empire built on sugar and slavery. British plantations in Jamaica, Barbados, and other islands relied on enslaved Africans. Profits flowed into London banks while brutal labor regimes destroyed generations of human lives. Slavery was abolished in 1833, but only after massive resistance. Canada's path to empire was less violent, but still deeply colonial. British settlers marginalized First Nations peoples, imposed English laws, and reshaped governance. Canada became a model dominion, loyal yet self-governing. Still, its foundations were built on land theft and indigenous suffering, hidden under polite imperial narratives. Britain's naval supremacy allowed control over islands worldwide. From Malta to Singapore, Gibraltar to Hong Kong, each outpost served trade or military dominance. These weren't random acquisitions. They were strategic chess pieces in an empire built to control oceans, ports, and the movement of global goods. Pacific Islanders were missionized, militarized, and marginalized. British influence erased native languages and customs, replacing them with English institutions. Colonization meant the Pacific was no longer its own world, it became an extension of Britain's global machine, with culture, religion, and resources stripped for imperial convenience. World wars strained the empire's strength. British colonies provided soldiers and resources, but returned home demanding rights. The cost of war, rising nationalism, and American pressure forced Britain to confront its declining power, and the contradictions at the heart of its imperial ideals. India's independence in 1947 was the breaking point. Gandhi's nonviolent resistance, combined with mass movements, made empire untenable. Partition brought chaos and bloodshed, but also freedom. Britain's most prized colony was lost, and with it, the myth of unbreakable imperial rule began to collapse. Africa soon followed. Britain granted independence to Ghana in 1957, followed by Nigeria, Kenya, and others. Decolonization was messy, often violent. British withdrawal didn't erase imperial legacies. Artificial borders, economic dependency, and cultural domination remained. The empire left, but its shadow stayed long after. Hong Kong was returned to China in 1997, symbolizing the final imperial retreat. From Victorian hub to post-colonial city, it represented the arc of empire, expansion, dominance, and slow relinquishment. By the 21st century, the British Empire had faded, but its consequences still echoed globally. The Commonwealth replaced colonial rule. Former colonies joined a voluntary association, bound by language, law, and history. Though no longer imperial, Britain maintained influence through soft power. The empire's physical form ended, but its cultural and political imprint endured in flags, parliaments, and trade systems worldwide. The British Empire's decline was not a clean break. It left scars, economic injustice, cultural loss, racial hierarchies. It also left connections, infrastructure, education, and shared languages. Understanding the empire means grappling with both sides, the oppression and the innovation, the violence and the legacy. The empire is gone, but its myths persist. Statues still stand. Streets still bear colonial names. History is being re-examined, by scholars, by activists, by nations seeking truth. To understand our world today, we must confront how the British Empire took over, and reshaped, the world. From plunder to parliament, sugar to railways, slavery to schools, the British Empire touched every continent, often with devastating impact. Its rise was calculated, its fall reluctant. If we truly want to understand today's global order, we must face the buried truths of Britain's imperial legacy. If you found this deep dive eye-opening, subscribe for more hidden history. Share this story, and help others learn how empires rise, fall, and still echo through our lives. History isn't past, it's power. Don't forget to like, comment, and keep questioning everything. See you in the next video.